Before Egypt wrapped pharaohs in linen, a fishing community on the Pacific coast was doing something far more extreme. They removed the dead person's skin, took out the organs, reinforced the skeleton with wooden sticks, rebuilt the missing body with clay, grasses, fibers, and hair, then gave the dead a new face, a wig, and a painted mask. But here is the detail that changes the entire story. They were not doing this only for kings. They did it for ordinary adults, for women, for children, even for infants. So who were these people? Why were they rebuilding human bodies like sculptures? And how did they begin doing it roughly 2,000 years before the famous mummies of Egypt? When most people hear the word mummy, they picture Egypt. A wrapped body, a decorated coffin, a pharaoh prepared for eternity. But the oldest known tradition of deliberate artificial mummification did not begin beside the Nile. It developed on the opposite side of the world, along the dry Pacific coast of what is now northern Chile and southern Peru. The people who created it are known today as the Chinchorro. They were not pyramid builders. They were marine hunter-gatherers who lived between one of the driest deserts on Earth and one of the richest oceans. Fresh water was scarce. Rain was almost non-existent. But the cold Pacific current brought fish, shellfish, sea mammals, and seabirds close to shore. The Chinchorro became expert fishers. They made hooks from shell and cactus spines. They used harpoons, nets, baskets, cords, and stone tools. They gathered food from river mouths and coastal wetlands. And many groups settled in the same coastal areas for long periods instead of constantly moving. That stability mattered. It allowed people to build cemeteries, return to the same places, and maintain connections with those who had died. The earliest known artificial Chinchorro mummies date to around 5000 BC. That is roughly 2,000 years before the famous Egyptian mummification tradition most people imagine. But age is not the only reason the Chinchorro are extraordinary. In Egypt, elaborate preservation became strongly associated with rulers, nobles, officials, and people who could afford complicated funerary treatment. Among the Chinchorro, artificial mummification crossed the social spectrum. Men received it. Women received it. Children received it. Some of the earliest and most carefully prepared bodies were infants. That means the story is not simply about status. It may also be a story about grief. Imagine losing a child in a small community where everyone knew one another. The Chinchorro did not always allow the body to disappear immediately into the earth. Instead, specialists transformed it. The earliest elaborate style is often called the black mummy technique. The name comes from the dark manganese pigment placed over the finished body. The process was astonishingly complex. First, the mortuary specialists removed the skin and soft tissues. The internal organs were taken out. The skeleton could be disassembled, cleaned, and dried. Long wooden sticks were attached along the spine and limbs to strengthen the bones. The skull was modified and reinforced. Then the body had to be rebuilt. Clay, ash, grasses, reeds, animal hair, and plant fibers could be used to restore volume. Limbs were reshaped. The torso was reconstructed. The skin might be replaced over the body, or missing areas could be recreated using other materials. A layer of paste smoothed the surface. A clay mask formed a new face. Short openings suggested eyes and a mouth. Human hair was attached as a wig. Finally, the mummy was covered with black manganese pigment. The result no longer looked like an untreated corpse. It looked like a carefully constructed human figure. A body transformed into an object of memory. Later, the Chinchorro changed their methods. One major style is known as the red mummy technique. Instead of completely taking the body apart, specialists made incisions, removed organs, dried the internal spaces, and packed the body with fibers and other material. Wooden supports were still used. The head could be removed temporarily and then reattached. A long wig was often added. The face was painted black, while much of the body was painted red with ochre. Other bodies were coated with mud or wrapped more simply. And some people were preserved naturally by the Atacama Desert without elaborate human treatment. So, Chinchorro mummy does not describe one unchanging recipe. It describes a mortuary tradition that evolved for thousands of years. But why did artificial mummification begin here? There is no single proven answer. One explanation begins with the desert itself. The Atacama is so dry that bodies can mummify naturally. The Chinchorro may have regularly encountered naturally preserved remains. Nature may have shown them that the dead could remain visible for years. Another explanation focuses on settlement and population. When coastal resources became more reliable, more people could live in the same places. More people meant more deaths. And repeated contact with preserved bodies may have helped create new rituals. There is also an environmental hypothesis involving arsenic. Some rivers in the region contain naturally high levels of arsenic. Researchers have suggested that chronic exposure may have increased miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant deaths. If families repeatedly experienced the deaths of babies and young children, elaborate preservation may have developed partly as a response to overwhelming grief. But that remains a hypothesis, not a final answer. The deepest question is what the completed mummies were for. Were they buried immediately? Were they displayed? Were they carried during rituals? Did families keep them close for a time? Some mummies show repairs and repeated repainting. That has led archaeologists to consider whether certain bodies remained socially active before final burial. The dead may have continued to participate in community memory. But we should be careful. The Chinchorro left no written explanation. Their beliefs cannot be reconstructed with certainty. What archaeology can show is the extraordinary amount of labor invested in the dead. Someone had to know anatomy. Someone had to prepare pigments. Someone had to gather reeds, clay, fibers, hair, and wood. Someone had to shape the mask. Someone had to rebuild the body without modern tools. And someone had to teach the process to the next generation. This was not accidental preservation. It was skilled, planned, cooperative work. The masks also reveal something deeply human. They were not realistic portraits. Many faces were simplified. A smooth surface. Small openings for the eyes. A narrow mouth. A wig framing the head. The person's decaying body had been transformed into a stable image. Not exactly alive. Not completely gone. This may be why the comparison with Egypt can be misleading. Both cultures preserve the dead, but they did not necessarily preserve them for the same reasons. Egyptian mummification developed inside a state society with kings, temples, professional embalmers, written religious texts, and beliefs about the afterlife that changed over thousands of years. The Chinchorro lived in smaller coastal communities without pyramids, royal tombs, or writing. Their artificial mummies were sculptural reconstructions created by marine hunter-gatherers. And they included people of different ages and social positions. The most important difference may not be technology. It may be who deserved to be remembered. For the Chinchorro, elaborate treatment was not limited to a ruler whose name had to survive forever. A fisherman could be rebuilt. A mother could be rebuilt. A child could be rebuilt. An infant who had barely lived could still receive a face, hair, color, and form. Thousands of years later, modern cities have expanded over some Chinchorro cemeteries. Construction has exposed burials. Museums and archaeologists now face another challenge: preserving bodies that survived for millennia in the desert but can deteriorate when humidity changes. The dry environment that protected them is part of the reason they still exist. Once removed from that environment, temperature, moisture, microorganisms, and pollution can damage them. Their preservation is no longer only an ancient problem. It is a modern one. So what did ancient Americans do to their dead before Egypt's famous mummies? The Chinchorro did not simply dry bodies. They dismantled them, reinforced them, rebuilt them, sculpted new faces, added wigs, painted them black or red, and extended that labor beyond chiefs or kings to men, women, children, and infants. We still do not know exactly what they believed. But the work itself sends a message across 7,000 years. The dead mattered. Their bodies could be changed, repaired, and made present again. Long before Egypt made mummies famous, fishing families on the Pacific coast had already turned grief, memory, anatomy, and art into one of the most extraordinary mortuary traditions in human history.